Hi, Algebra 2 students. This is part 2 of complex numbers. So this is part 2. Do not watch this unless you've seen part 1. This is part 2. And we can perform operations with complex numbers. So in the last video we talked about imaginary numbers. A complex number is any number that can be written in the form of a plus bi. So a real number and an imaginary number together would be a complex number. So let's simplify these complex numbers. So what we're going to do is we're going to combine like terms with these. So the first one, we're actually going to take 5 plus 2, and that's 7. And we have a negative 7i plus 4i, which would be a negative 3i. And you can write it as 7 minus 3i if you'd like. You can do it that way. So this is a complex number. You're adding two complex numbers together, you're going to get a complex number. Now what about subtracting? So with subtracting, we have to remember to distribute the negative sign. That's probably the biggest mistake I'll see with this, is that we'll forget to distribute the negative sign. So it'll be plus, it'll be a negative, and this will become a positive. So we have 4 minus 3 is 1, and a negative 8 plus 6i, that's going to be a negative 2i. So we'll just write 1 minus 2i. Now what if we multiply two complex numbers together? We're going to FOIL, and when we do that, we'll get 6 times 9 is 54. 6 times 2i is going to be 12i. Negative 8i times 9 is going to be a negative 72i. And then negative 8i times 2i is going to be a negative 16i squared. So let's go ahead and combine like terms. These would come together to be negative 60i and negative 16i squared. Remember, I squared is a negative 1, so negative 16 times the negative 1 is a positive 16. So we can actually put 54 and 16 together, and that's going to be 70 minus 60i, which is our final answer. Now dividing complex numbers is a different story. What you need to know for that is complex conjugates here. So a plus bi and a minus bi, those are complex conjugates. And the product, meaning if you multiply these two together, you're going to get a real number. So complex conjugates are going to help us with dividing complex numbers, because remember, we can't have square roots inside the denominator. You probably remember that from geometry. And when we have I in the denominator, remember I is the square root of a negative 1. We can't have that. It's illegal. So we got to change it up. And we got to multiply by the complex conjugate. So we're going to multiply 3 minus 6i. And since I did that on bottom, got to do it on top. So when we do that, we're going to go ahead and distribute on top here. So 2i times 3 is going to be 6i. And here I'll show the distributing. And then we have 2i times a negative 6i. So that's going to be a negative 12i squared. And then on the bottom, we're going to FOIL it out. So, and I will write this over here so you guys can see what I'm doing. So we have 3 times 3, which is 9. We have a negative 18i and a positive 18i. And then we have a negative 36i squared. Negative 36i squared. So these cancel out. And I squared is negative 1, remember? So we have 9 plus 36, which ends up being 45. So, and we can simplify this up, this I squared. So this is a negative 1. So it ends up being 6i plus 12 over 45. And that's what we want. We don't want any i's in the denominator. Can't do that. That's illegal. Let's try another one. So here we have an I in the denominator. We have 4 plus I over 5I. So all we got to do is get this I out of the denominator. So what we can do is multiply it by I over I. So when we do that, we're going to distribute. So we get 4I plus I squared. We're distributing here, which ends up being 4I minus 1. And here when we multiply, we get 5I squared. And remember, I squared is a negative 1, so 5 times negative 1 is a negative 5. And that would be our final answer. So notice there is no complex conjugate here. We're just multiplying by I to get rid of I in the denominator. Alright, let's try another one. And this will be our final example. So we have 2 plus I over 1 minus I. So we're going to multiply by the complex conjugate. And I'm going to move this over here so we have more room, hopefully, maybe. There we go. So we'll multiply by 1 plus I and 1 plus I. So we're going to go ahead and FOIL both of them. And when we do that, we end up with 2 plus 2I plus 1I plus I squared. And on the bottom, we end up with 1 plus I, 1 minus I, or excuse me, just minus I, and then we have minus I squared. And that's because we FOILed. So take a moment, make sure you understand where I got all those imaginary numbers. So let's go ahead and simplify. So here we're going to get 3I right here. And this, remember, is negative 1I squared. So we end up with, if we combine like terms, 2 plus a negative 1 is going to be 1 plus 3I. And down here, we have the i's cancel out, and a negative I squared is going to be a negative negative 1, so it ends up becoming plus, so then we have 2. And your book likes you to write it as a complex number, since we started out with complex numbers. So you have to have a real number and imaginary. So we're going to go ahead and split this up as 1/2 plus 3I over 2. And that's it. So let me know if you have any questions over complex numbers. And have a good weekend, and we'll see you all later.